Hey everyone, this is Scott from the Forgot to Grow podcast. Welcome to another edition of ReWatching a Series of Unfortunate Events. Today I'm talking about Season 2, Episode 7, The Hostile Hospital, Part 1. So I just finished rewatching this episode, and this episode brings back big memories of reading this book when I was younger, because I read this book at a time in my childhood when I went to the hospital a bunch. I had stitches so many times in almost every limb in my body because I was a little bit accident prone. I wasn't like a super rough kid, but I just, was slightly adventurous. Kind of some scratches and nicks here and there that needed some stitches and stuff. So I was in the hospital a bunch. I also spent like 5 days in the hospital when I was younger, so hospitals fuck with me a little bit. Sorry for the language. But rewatching this one, it really flashed me back to reading the book, because like I said, when I was reading the book at the time, I had a lot of experience with hospitals. I spent a lot of time in hospitals myself, so a lot of the things that were going on in this book kind of I connect with a little bit, because I'm like, yeah, hospitals suck. And so I really enjoy that about this episode. The Baudelaires having to suffer through some of it, not all of it, a little bit of the paperwork here and the bureaucracy here and there of a hospital, the countless waiting. They don't have to wait quite as long because, it's only a 45-minute episode that I just watched, but it was still a fun episode like that. I thought they did a great job of capturing some of the elements of the book with the library of records. I very much remember that from the books, and how it is not organized really at all. It is and it isn't. Everything's in a filing cabinet, but there's no real system to that organization. As when we see in this episode, they're looking for a file that says Snicket on it, and they go looking under where Snicket should be found. It's not there. Instead, they do see a Sniffers cake file, which I thought was funny. Cake Sniffers. That's just a fun little nod they threw in there. There's a few other files. I didn't catch them all. They rattle off a few of them like really quick after another. But yeah, there's no organization to it. The almost blind record keeper and stuff. So I thought they did a great job capturing those elements. Olaf sneaking around the hospital and stuff like that, and capturing that kind of darker feel that I thought this book had. But maybe it's just like I said, maybe I was just a little traumatized because of the hospital stuff. But yeah, I felt this episode did a good job balancing the fact that it's a little bit of a darker episode with it being a hospital. A hospital always has a little bit of a darker tone and theme to it. This one in particular, because it's all nasty and dingy looking and stuff like that, but that's part of the aesthetic of this world, so I thought it was a really great job. I just really enjoyed this episode for that. At the beginning, we also see a VFD thing, a little misnomer though, I don't know if that's the right word, but yeah, the volunteers fighting disease, those singing guys, I remember them from the books too, which is just a little bit of a funny little bit that they bring back for this. It does come a little bit more to life in the show as opposed to in the book, which I believe they still were singing in that, but still had the rhyming thing going on, if I'm remembering correctly. Be sure to let me know if I got that wrong or not. But yeah, then we get another one of Olaf's terrible names in this, which I both love. No, I just love this about the series. Just he always has such a ridiculous name that he just comes up with on the spot. And I do think that was vaguely related to the books too. It wasn't a little more than he came up with on the spot, but he definitely did have a lot of bad undercover names, and it's just like every time it's just a little ridiculous. Like this one, medical school. Yeah, he's I can't even pronounce the way it's actually said, but it was just ridiculous, and that was a little bit of a funny thing to notice this one. Olaf had to do paperwork in this episode again, which I distinctly remember coming up in one of the previous episodes that I've watched, him getting shafted with a bunch of paperwork, and that's slowing up the process. Oh, it was Mr. Poe, and Mr. Poe was trying to adopt them when he was pretending to be the one sea captain, and Mr. Poe had made him do hours and hours of paperwork. So I just thought that was funny, a connection in between that you see that, yeah, the world is really run by paperwork. So that was a fun one. What else do we see? Oh, the orphan staying in the unfinished wing. That was another thing I remember from the books pretty distinctly. It was a little bit more of a frightening thing, I thought. I don't think they hung out with the, the record keeper out when they were hiding out in the unfinished wing in the book. I don't believe so, but I think they condensed that for the Netflix episode, because I believe that was a couple sequences where they decide about whether they're going to actually do it, and then they make a plan to take the keys. So I think they just kind of condensed that in this episode, if I'm remembering the book correctly. That is, I could just be completely wrong. What else do I have written down? They do end up stealing the keys and getting the Snicket file, which they eventually find, which we get a brief little a little clip of it in this episode where we see it's a debriefing with Jacques, and he says there's a possibly a survivor of the fire, and the orphan's like, oh, do one of our parents survive the fire? And I always remember this thing because I'm just this part in the show at least, because I can't remember if this happened in the books or not exactly, but I remember this part from the first time I watched it and being like, is that another one of those, like, was there a third person in the house that I don't know about? Was there Uncle Bobby hanging out, and that's where they're trying to throw me off, they're trying to make me think of parents coming back when I already thought that once? So I'm prepared just in case it's not actually a parent come back, but it'd also be interesting if they did, that if one of their parents did survive, that'd be a nice happy ending for the Baudelaires at the very end. But I don't know, I didn't read the last 4 books, that's why I was excited for the 3rd season to get out, so I gotta get to rewatching the next episode, so I can get to the end of the season for the next episode. But be sure to let me know in the comments below what you guys thought of this episode and anything I might have got wrong between the connection between this episode and the books. I always like to make sure I didn't get everything too wrong. But thanks again for joining me today, and have a good one.